Today we're going to talk about one of your absolute favorite topics, money. Money. And how many of you don't have enough? Okay, yeah. How many of you have too much? Okay. Oh, man. I saw Steve's guitar go up, and I thought, man, I'm going to tap into Steve and get a little extra money today because he's got more than he can use. But money is kind of an important topic. How many of you know Howard Stern? Okay, the shock jock of, that's a shame that you know him. But he has this kind of brash, obnoxious, vulgar kind of tone to him, doesn't he? But did you know that in 1994, he was going to run for the governor of New York? Now, this man has been fined more than $2.5 million for his brash, obnoxious, vulgar talk on radio. Okay, the FCC has fined him over $2.5 million. So you would think he would be a pretty open guy, but he withdrew from the race. Now, do you know why he withdrew from the race? Because he was forced to disclose his financial statement. I mean, the guy has, he's bared his soul out how he thinks about just about everything in the world. But yet when it came to his finances, he withheld that and he withdrew from the race simply because he did not want to expose that part of himself to the world. It's kind of an interesting dilemma, when you see somebody that's so bold and brash and obnoxious and out there but I can't tell you about my finance. I can tell you about every other area of my life, and I can tell you about some things about your life, but I'm not going to tell you about my finances. So he withdrew from the race, never ran for the governorship of the great state of New York. Now, how many of you are thankful for that? If anything, they'll keep him out of that. I'm fine with that. But today, we're coming to this topic of money. And one of the things that I think that is very valuable and important to us as believers is to have a proper perspective about money. Why do we have it? How much do we need? And what is it good for? And what's it used for? In the kingdom of God, if we could put some kind of a structure to that, some kind of an umbrella over that to where we can understand, okay, now I understand, then it would help us to do and to act more wisely with our money. Funny thing, no matter how many times you've read the Bible, do you ever come across some of those passages where you just scratch your head and go, huh? Today we're going to start out with one of those, and it's found in Proverbs chapter 30, verses 7 through 9. Okay? And here's what it says in Proverbs 37 through 9. It says this: 2 things I ask of you. Now, let's frame this whole thing. This whole thing is a prayer from the writer of Proverbs, a guy named Agur, A-G-U-R. And he's praying to God, and he's going to ask God for some very simple things. And I want you to look at it, and I want you to ask yourself the question, would you ask God for that? Let's take a look at the couple of the things that he looks for. He says, 2 things I ask of you. Number 1, deny them not to me before I die. So he says, okay, I've got 2 things, God, I want you to do for me, and I don't want you to deny them for me, for the rest of my days on this earth. And here's verse number 8. He says, remove far from me falsehood and lying. In other words, help me never to lie again. How many of you are good with that? That's a great prayer, right? I would pray that prayer. I don't want to lie. I want people to know the truth. I don't want to have to. How many of you have ever lied before, though? What's the problem with lying? Okay, you have to have a really good memory. See, I'm old, and I don't have a very good memory. So when you lie, you have to remember who you told what to. Have you ever done that? I wonder what I do. And sometimes you avoid conversations. You avoid entire topics because if you are in the habit of stretching the truth or, maybe embellishing the truth, you don't know quite what you said to so-and-so or so-and-so, and you don't know who you told what. So you have to have a really good memory to be good at that. So the writer here of Proverbs, Agur, he says, help me not to do that. Prevent me from falsehood and lying. And then he asks the second thing. He says, give me neither poverty nor riches. Have you ever prayed and asked God, hey, don't give me too much money, God? Anybody ever pray that? No, we don't usually pray that. This is kind of an unusual prayer. I'm all for the don't give me poverty part, but withhold the riches from me, don't give me too much money. I don't know, I could have scratched my head with that one. But he goes on, and he gives us the reason here. He says, don't do that, Lord. Feed me with the food that is needful for me. I want you to circle those words, needful. Okay? In other words, give me the stuff that I need. Give me the stuff that I need, not necessarily the stuff that's going to cause me to go crazy, because he says here in verse number 9, lest I be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Have you ever seen somebody that got real wealthy? Or maybe you've experienced this. You've had plenty of money and you've had no need for God. When do you need God? When you don't have what you need. Okay? That's when we have the greatest need, the greatest dependence on God. And Agur here, he understands that. He says, don't give me so little that I might go out and steal, but don't give me so much that I would deny you and not be dependent upon you. And he says this, because he says, I could get to the point and say, I'm so self-sufficient. I'd say, who's God? Who needs God? I don't care. And he says, or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God. Now, I really love Agur, because he is really concerned about the reputation of his God. He doesn't want to steal. Well, why would you not want to steal? Well, I wouldn't want to get caught. Because you know what happens when you get caught stealing? You have to go to court, you get tried, you get whatever penalty you get imposed upon you, and you probably will have to make some restitution. You have to pay back. And I don't like the paying back part. I don't like the getting caught part. I don't like the exposure to my reputation. I don't like any of that stuff. But it's all about me, isn't it? But Agur says, I don't want to do that. I don't want to steal. I don't want to profane the name of my God. I don't want him to get a bad reputation because I'm one of his kids. How much different would our lives be if we were concerned for the reputation of God? How much more would we want to shine his love? How much more would we want to show the world that we are his children if we knew that what we did profaned his name? It made him look bad. Now, have you ever prayed, Lord, don't give me a raise? You know, those of you who are working, no, probably nobody's prayed that prayer, right? You know, in fact, we pray every time we come up to that date when we're going to get a review. We say, oh, God, help me, God. Help me to get the best raise, the maximum raise possible. Because we want, number one, the money. Number two, we want the status of being a great employee, and we want to be recognized for being good. So the maximum raise does that. But you know what money does to us? It causes us to be independent. Have you ever heard the phrase independently wealthy? I would like to be independently wealthy. You know, would you like to be independently wealthy? Well, when we stop and think about it in the spiritual realm, we don't want to be independent from God. We want to be completely, totally dependent upon him and follow him so that we get to the right places, do the right things, experience the right stuff, and have the right things. We want to experience the presence of God. So it's interesting. How many of you have ever seen contests out there and it says, oh, if you could win $10,000? You can win $10,000. You ever see stuff like that, the sweepstakes? How many of you do the clearinghouse thing? You know, anybody do Publishers Clearinghouse? You know, I mean, when I get those, I never enter that stuff because I know they're going to make me buy magazines. But I love that stuff because I think, you could win $1 million. You could win whatever it is, $500 million. I don't know how much it is. But when you get that stuff sent to your house, they don't send it so much anymore. But we used to get one like every 2 or 3 months. And I'm thinking, they're giving away a lot of money in a rapid succession. I don't know how they can do that. And I would never enter, of course. But I would always fantasize, what would I do if? You know, if I won. What would you do if you won the lottery? What would you do if you won the big one? You know, you got hundreds of millions of dollars. What would you do? And I'm going to say this. It's more important what you do with what you have than how much you have. God says, Jesus says, if you're faithful with the little things, you'll be faithful with the big things. So learn to be faithful with little things. I know a lot of times, you know, I get caught in this trap of thinking, you know, when I have some money, I'm going to help people. I'm going to donate. I'm going to do whatever. But you know what? If I'm not doing it with the little bit that I have, I'll probably not do it with the big stuff that I have. So what Jesus says is be faithful with that little stuff. Start doing now what you would do if you had a lot. And you know what happens sometimes? When we're faithful, God makes sure that his resources get to the people who will then use it for his purposes. So keep that in mind. Now, it's interesting. None of us, when we come across that Publishers Clearinghouse or when we think about the lotto or whatever, we never say, God, don't let me win that. Don't let me win that. We don't pray like Agur did. We pray that, kind of help me out, God. Help me. But Scripture teaches that there's danger. There's real danger in having more than we can manage. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, is having more than you can manage or not managing properly what we do have. Because that's really the biblical view of money. Managing properly what God has blessed you with. Now, a lot of people would say, it would be a sin to be rich, And, when I say that to you right now, it would be, if I said that, it would be a sin to be rich. Some of you would say, I'd sure like to sin, because I'd like to give that a try. I'd like to find out what it's like to do that. But it's not a sin to be rich. But Paul tells us, that the love of money is the root, the source of all kinds of evil stuff, right? And so what we do is we automatically assume that wealth is something to be avoided. Not true. Not true. Managing wealth properly is what the New Testament teaches us. Now, I was taught by my parents what? I grew up in an age, a little longer ago than some of you did. But my parents taught me that you don't talk about money. You don't talk about how much you make. You don't talk about what you do with your money. You don't reveal any of that stuff to anybody. And so you know what I grew up with? I grew up with this sense of secrecy about money, and I didn't know what to do with what I had. Because what? We didn't talk about it. In fact, I read some statistics this last week that said 95% of churchgoers never discuss their personal finances with other church members. That's us, huh? We don't talk about that stuff. And thusly, if some of us have gotten on the right track, that's great. But if we haven't gotten on the right track, we might be able to manage to get some help from some other people. Now, in the Bible, it's interesting because prayer is mentioned 270 times. Prayer. 270 times. Loving others is mentioned 371 times. Did you know money and possessions is talked about more than 2,000 times? Money and possessions. So remember, my mom taught me you don't talk about finances in public. So we're going to today, so don't tell her. And we're going to talk about finances today. Don't tell her. John Wesley, there's a quote there on your outline, and it says this: earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. And right here, John Wesley is telling us the basic summation of what we're going to talk about here today. He says this: earn all you can. Why would you want to earn all you can? Because you want to achieve the fullest potential that God has built within you, so that you can then take God's resources and use them for God's purposes. Okay? Save all you can. Save them so that they will be available. You know what? One of the things I would love to see our church do is have enough resources that we would have enough personal resources so that if God called us to do a mission trip somewhere, that we'd just say, yeah, I got the money to do that. I'm in. You know why most of us don't go to some faraway places to go on a mission trip? We can't afford it. I just couldn't afford it, so therefore I can't go. But if we could get ourselves to a position where we had God's resources doing God's business in God's time, we'd be way better off. And then finally, the thing John Wesley says is give all you can. Earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. Now, today, we're going to be talking about balancing your bottom line. And there's 4 observations I want us to make this morning. The first one is balancing your bottom line demands hard work. Balancing your bottom line, being wise with your resources, being wise with your money, doing what God wants you to do with it is going to require some hard work. Now notice what it says in Proverbs 10:4. A slack hand, and I circle that word slack hand, and just draw a little arrow over to it and say lazy. Okay, a lazy person. Okay, a slack hand, a lazy person causes what? Poverty. Okay, but, and here's the contrast there in Proverbs 10:4. But the hand of the diligent makes rich. Okay. Now, I don't want anybody here ever to go away with a health and wealth gospel that we teach here. We don't teach that. That if you follow God, you'll be healthy all the time, and if you follow God, you'll be rich all the time. That's not true. Because as you read through Proverbs will give you general information. It's not necessarily saying that in all cases, because each one of us could look and say, we know some lazy people that have made it pretty well, right? Have you ever known some lazy people that seem to do well, and they have this, what we call the Midas touch? And King Midas, everything he touched turned to gold. And, they just have that ability to do that. And they don't work real hard. But in general, what the writer of Proverbs is telling us here, generally, lazy people don't do well. Diligent people do well. And so therefore, success is hard work. In Proverbs 14, 23 through 24, it says this: in all toil there is profit. Okay? In hard work there is profit. Now, not just in financial profit, but in the profit that comes from doing a good job. Have you ever had the satisfaction when you do something and you did it right and you did it well, you end up at the end going, I did the right thing. I did the right stuff. And therefore, no matter what happens, I know I did the right thing. And there's satisfaction there. And that's what the writer of Proverbs is including here. In all toil there is profit, and financial profit as well. But mere talk tends only to poverty. Now, I'm just going to ask you, have you ever seen somebody that talked a good game? There's people out there that talk a good game, and it sounds like maybe they're, I don't know, they must have it together. But talk, it says here, if there's just talk and no toil, it's going to lead to poverty. And then he tells about, in verse number 24, he talks about the crown of the wise. Okay, the crowning glory of the wise is their wealth. But the folly of fools brings folly. Okay? It comes to no good end. Crown of the wise is their wealth. When you see somebody that's done a good job, that gets respect. Okay? And when you do a good job, it's not just about money, but it's about having influence. And when we have influence, we can use that for the case of Christ. We can do that for the causes of God. And so therefore, having influence is a great thing. It's a great thing. And that's the crown of the wise, having influence and using your finances properly in order to do properly with that influence. Now, we're wise when we work hard to achieve our fullest potential. Don't raise your hands, but how many of you would say, I've reached my fullest potential, I've peaked? Probably none of us would say that. We haven't peaked yet. And not just financially, but in influence. Using God's favor upon our lives to cause us to influence others for others. Now, if you read the Old Testament, and in the Old Testament, it starts out with a story about a young couple named Adam and Eve. In Adam and Eve's time, they were given one basic rule. What was the one basic rule? Don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, correct? There were probably thousands of trees, and all of them were good for food. And you just have one. But how many of you, would say, you can't tell me what to do? That we have that basic attitude. It's called our sin nature. You can't tell me what to do. I'm an independent person. I know what I want and I know how to get it. And Adam and Eve suffered from that. They got deluded a little bit with some help from the serpent as well. But they said, let's test drive this tree, this fruit, and let's see what it really does. Because surely we won't die. And so they, and that's what they were tempted with. And so now they go out there, they eat the fruit, the one tree that they were told not to. And what happened? They sinned, and there was a curse that came upon them. Okay, what was the curse for the woman? Do you know what the curse for the woman is? There's going to be pain in childbirth. Okay, ladies, y'all can identify with that, can't you? Okay, so there's that. Now, what was the curse for the ground? Oh, there's going to be weeds. Okay, what was the curse for the man? Okay, because of the weeds and stuff, when you toil the ground, it's going to cause you to have to work harder. Okay. Now, sometimes we think that work is the curse. Work is not a curse. Work is the thing that God designed for us to do. Because what did he originally tell Adam and Eve? Okay, have dominion. Have dominion over this land. And I want you to be fruitful, I want you to multiply, but I want you to take care of what I've created. So that stewardship responsibility of caring for God's creation is going to require work, and we were designed for work. Now, work gets a little more difficult, doesn't it, because of the curse? And there's all kinds of things that flow out of that. Not only is work harder now, agriculture is harder now, and that's really what the curse of the weeds and stuff. But it's also harder to relate to people too, isn't it? And as you get in a corporate setting or as you get in a workplace setting, it's harder to relate to people, isn't it? Because what are we doing when we're at work? We're constructing fig leaves. Remember when we talked about Adam and Eve? And we all have these fig leaves to keep people from seeing the real us. The real us. Remember Adam and Eve? Adam and Eve, they were naked and they were not ashamed. They were not ashamed. They were naked and not ashamed. God could see them, and they didn't have any reason. But now, not just clothing, the shame of nakedness there, but the nakedness of our soul, the nakedness of our psyche, the nakedness of our inner selves. That's what we try to hide, right? I say, if you really knew me, you wouldn't love me. So therefore, I have to look lovely. I have to look lovable. And so I project this image that maybe is the real me, and I hope it is, but maybe not. Have you ever seen people on Facebook? People are always better on Facebook than they are in person. Have you noticed that? When you have your profile, or when you're projecting an image, whatever it is, on electronically, you're always better. I used to have T-shirts that kind of reflected that kind of stuff, and we do that. We try to project an image because it's a fig leaf that we're using to disguise the real, true us. Now, John Wesley, this guy that we quoted before, he was a missionary. In fact, he established the Methodist denomination. And what he did was he started this great revival in England. And as he saw people come to Christ, it was basically and largely people that were not very well off. It was poor people that were coming to the gospel and coming to Christ. But he noticed that as they came to Christ, and they were generally people that didn't have good jobs, didn't have social standing, he saw that as they created this biblical work ethic, they came to know Christ, and so they started working hard. And they wanted their God to be known, so they worked very hard and very visibly so that people could see the change in them. And as they projected that new image, their belief in this work ethic, their social status rose, and so did their economic level. And he noticed that was two blessings, very physical blessings, and we might say things to avoid. But he said people rose socially and they had greater influence around them, and they also became wealthier because they worked hard, and that hard work caused them to reap the benefits of that. In a book, Why America Doesn't Work, Chuck Colson and Charles Eckerd, they wrote this book, Why America Doesn't Work. And not that the system of America doesn't work, but the people of the system don't work hard like we used to. And they made some interesting observations, and they looked back in history. And in history, they said, we believe that the United States has become great because in the early days, it was largely dominated by Christian thought. And this Christian thought was that you work hard. You make people know that you're an honest person. You're a person of integrity. You're a person that has great work ethic, because that's what God teaches us. And when God teaches us that, we perform it. So as they performed that, he said that the economy of the United States rose and rose and rose and rose and rose. He says now he's fearful. They both said that now they're fearful that we're going to decline because we're now transitioning to this economy of entitlement, where people are entitled to things from the government, and thusly it's no longer a labor ethic, it's no longer a work ethic, but it's an entitlement ethic. And he says it's going to lead to our economy declining rather rapidly. Now think about it. Do we have some of that sticking in our head a little bit? If you were laid off from work, okay, if you were laid off from work, and don't answer this out loud, but if you were laid off from work, would you collect unemployment? Don't answer out loud. I'm just trying to sucker you. Okay, would you collect unemployment? And once you started collecting unemployment, would you take a job that made less than what you were getting in unemployment? Okay, no. Okay, now if we answer no, what we're saying is we don't have a very good work ethic. It's not an ethic of work, it's an ethic of income. So think about that. Think about that. So that kind of stuff. We also have a welfare mentality, that has risen. And that is, if I can't make as much money working as I can make in welfare, I'm not going to work. Because that would just be craziness, wouldn't it? Once again, we don't have the work ethic, we have the income ethic. And so therefore, those two things breed a sense of entitlement. I'm entitled to these government programs because they pay better than my work would. I want you to know that there are times, and I'm not going to say that. See me afterwards if you really want to know. God, what was he going to say? Okay, now, I'm going to give you some instruction here. Don't work for a check. Don't work for a check anymore. It's not about the money. It's about the influence that you gain when you're working. It's about being Christ in your workplace. It's about being Christ and influencing people to know Him and to love Him. The other day I was talking with a guy and talking about spiritual goals. And one of the guys that was in the conversation said, "Oh, well, give me an example of a spiritual goal." And the guy knew that I was a pastor, so he says, "Hey, Mike, why don't you handle this one?" And I said, "Oh, I'd be happy to handle that. Do you have spiritual goals?" Okay, I hope you do. And I told him, my spiritual goal, if I could, and there are things that lead to this, there's steps up to this, but the big, broad, general spiritual goal is to know Christ, know God, and to show other people who He is. Okay, everything that I do spiritually goes toward that big goal of knowing God, knowing His love, knowing His Son, Jesus Christ, and showing others who that person is. Now, that's what we get when we have a place of work. We have an arena in which to do that. Now, we get distracted a lot, don't we? We get distracted at work. We get distracted making money. We get distracted focusing on our tasks and stuff like that. I'm not saying don't do that, because that's where your influence is earned. Now, once your influence is earned, then people are going to see you at lunchtime and say, "You know what? I've noticed how you work. I've noticed that you really do it. You put it out there. You're effective. You're diligent. You go the extra mile." And what does Jesus teach us? He teaches us to go the extra mile. A lot of times when we're at work, what are we doing? We're calculating how much we're getting paid, how much that's worth, and how much we're willing to give in order to get that. No, it's about gaining influence. It's no longer about working for a check. It's about working for influence. I'm working so that I can gain influence and that I will be able to represent who God is, who Jesus is, and how other people can come to know Him. Number 2. Let me make sure. Number 2. Balancing your bottom line means also minimizing debt. Okay, this is real practical. Minimizing debt. You notice what I did not put on there? I did not put never experiencing debt. Never experiencing debt. Because I think, and there's a lot of Christian teachers that will tell you, never experience debt. No, never go into debt. Now, how many of you would own a house if you never went into debt? How many of you would own a car if you never went into debt? Now, cars maybe we could get away with if we got an early start. And here's what I'm going to say about that. Is that if you wanted to buy a car, I used to be a car salesman, so I have some authority here. If you want to buy a car without ever having to finance it, here's what you do. Buy the car that you can afford. Okay? Now, what kind of car can you afford? You might afford $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, whatever you have in the bank. Okay, buy that car. While you're driving that car, and you probably won't drive it for very long, what you're going to do is you're going to save a car payment every month. Whatever car payment, $200, $300, $400. Okay, you're going to put that in the bank. Then, when you get a little more money saved up, a couple of $1,000s more, you take that car in, you trade it in. It's not going to be worth much less than the $2,000 you paid for it, but you're going to trade it in. They're going to give you half that. You're going to get $1,000. Plus, you've saved up another couple of $1,000s in the time that you've been driving it because you've been saving your car payment. Now you have $3,000. Go buy a $3,000 car. Then drive that. You'll drive it for a little bit longer because it's a little better car. Numbers aside, this is just the principle. So then you're going to keep making that car payment to yourself. You're going to save that money. You're going to buy a better car, a better car, a better car, a better car. Eventually, you'll buy a new car. And you know what? You'll pay cash. So if you want to do that, that's how you can do that. Okay? Now most of you are smiling at me and say, "I don't want to drive that $2,000 car." Okay? And therefore, pay that car payment. Okay, now, so here, let me get to the right page. Okay, minimizing debt. In Proverbs 22:7, it says this: "The rich rules over the poor, and," here's the important factor, "the borrower is the slave of the lender." Have you ever bought something and afterwards gone, "Oh, I wish I hadn't done that. Or I wish I hadn't financed that. Oh, buyer's remorse. Anybody here ever have buyer's remorse? Cindy and I, when we were young, we got this thing. I forgot, Columbia. What was that tape thing that we got? Columbia House. Yeah. Well, but there was this other thing that you got 700,000 cassette tapes, and you had to pay so much a month to get them, and then they would send you extra ones, and if you didn't want one, you just had to say, oh, don't send me that one. But they would never get that phone call, so they kept sending them, and pretty soon I'm just going, man, I rue the day that we ever signed up for this thing, and it was just a bummer. So we've all been there, right? You ever buy a car and say, oh, I wish I hadn't bought that car? Just a little side story here. Cindy's dad, when he was alive, it was always fun because I could get him to buy any car that I wanted him to buy. All I had to do was go over to his house and say, hey, I went and looked at this, whatever kind of car it was. Man, I'm thinking about buying it. And he would go out and buy it. I remember we were looking at this used car one time, and this is the best story of all. We were looking at this used car one time, and it was an Oldsmobile. Back when they first started out, they converted some gasoline engines into diesel engines. And how many of you remember that? Man, they were the junkiest cars in the world, but you didn't know that at the time. And so we went and looked at one at this Oldsmobile dealership, and I went over and I told Cindy's dad, man, I'm really thinking about getting a diesel. They got these Oldsmobiles, and man, they're really nice and stuff. So he went and bought one. And he had nothing but trouble with this thing, and that's kind of always fun for a son-in-law to think on his father-in-law, but it was a bummer, because of that. But sometimes the borrower is the slave to the lender. Once you get involved in those things and you don't gain equity and all this stuff, and he would always pay cash for his cars, but sometimes you get to that point and you get something home and you go, oh. And what do they tell you? All it takes is 24 easy monthly payments. How many of you have ever made an easy monthly payment? None of them are easy. I don't care how much it is. If it's $50, it's not an easy payment. It might be profitable. You might be doing some investment stuff or whatever. But paying for stuff on time, none of those payments are easy. So generally, typically, financing stuff is not a good idea long term. Deuteronomy 15:6 says this, and this is where I want you to get. For the Lord your God will bless you. Now, God is speaking to the nation of Israel here, and he's telling them what a great influence they're going to be to all of the nations around them. And he says this, for the Lord your God will bless you as he promised you, and you shall do what? You shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. And you shall rule over many nations, but they shall not rule over you. Now, what does he say here? He says you're going to be a blessing to other people because you're going to be able to loan money. You're going to lend to other people. Now, if borrowing money was a sin, what he would be doing is he would be telling his nation, Israel, that you're going to lend to other people and cause them to sin. God would never do that. God would never cause his people to sin by lending money to put other people into bondage to them. What he's saying is that you will have resources that you will be able to bless other people with. Borrowing in and of itself is not the sin. It's not a sin to borrow. But obviously, let's be honest, it's not always a good idea to borrow for everything that you buy. And I'm going to give you a little statistics here. The average American household today is $16,000 in debt to their credit cards. $16,000. Okay? 20 years ago, how much do you think that was? 20 years ago. Less than $3,000. 20 years ago. So it's gone through the roof in 20 years. And what do you think is going to happen in the future? You think the credit card debt is going to get smaller or larger? It's going to get larger. Why is it going to get larger? Because you deserve a break today. Okay? All those commercials that say you deserve. We hear that often enough, we start believing that. We deserve. In 1911, they did a survey of all the people, and they asked them, what things do you absolutely need? And on that list, there was 5 items. 5 items we absolutely need. I can't name for you what the items are. But they did it again in 1984. What do you need? And they did a survey, and there were 111 things on that list. What's the difference? in time, it's gone from 5 things I absolutely need. Now, I need 111 things. I need, a car. I need this. I need that. And I need a curling iron. And I need Rogaine or whatever. We just need stuff. And it's crazy. So that credit card debt is going to increase. Did you know that the average college graduate graduates with a $3,100 credit card debt? Yeah, it was amazing to me. When my kids started going to school, and when they started going to college, they would get these credit cards, offers in the mail. And I'm thinking, these kids don't even work. How are they going to get a credit card? How are they going to do this? But there are some unscrupulous credit card companies that will get you into bondage and, pull the trigger on you and make you pay. 20 years. How long does it take you to pay off your credit card right now if you pay minimum payments? 20 years. Count them. 20 years. And I'm surprised it's even that. I'm surprised it ever gets paid off. 20 years if you make minimum payments. You know how much the credit card company gets from you on that? Way too much. Okay. Now here, I'm going to tell you, if you have a credit card, use it. Okay? Use it. But here's how you should use it. Charge only those items that you can pay off at the end of the month. Charge only those items that you can pay off at the end of the month. And therefore, you will not pay you will not accrue any interest, and you will be able to pay it off. You won't be in debt. Okay, so if you have credit cards, use them wisely, please, please, please. Okay, Psalm 37:21. The wicked borrows. Oh, I'm way behind, huh? The wicked borrows, but does not pay back. But the righteous is generous and gives. Now notice the dichotomy here. What does it say about the wicked? They borrow and don't pay back. Okay, they do what? They borrow and stiff you. Okay, they borrow and stiff you, and that's the wicked people. Now the righteous, you would think that the contrast here would be the righteous does borrow and does pay back. You would think that's what the writer would say, but no, he doesn't say that. He says, but the righteous is generous and gives. Okay, he doesn't just pay back, but the righteous person gives to the causes of his God. Okay, no matter that if you see someone, and I'm really big on this. If you see someone that needs something and you have it, give it. Give it. And one of the things that goes through our minds as a church constantly is, what do people need? Okay, what do they need? What do we have? How can we get it to them? What do they need? What do we have? How do we get it to them? And that's what the righteous person does. He's generous and gives. Romans 13:7 says this, and the Apostle Paul speaking, pay to all that is owed them. Pay to all what is owed to them. Taxes to whom taxes are owed. Revenue to whom revenue is owed. Respect to whom respect is owed. Honor to whom honor is owed. Pay not just the cash that you owe, but pay respect, pay honor, pay the things, those intangibles that will cause you to value influence and to gain influence. Proverbs 22:7, the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. We've seen that already. And so therefore, let's repeat that. Now there's a third observation we need to make, and that is that balancing the bottom line means to live modestly. Live modestly. Now, I'm not opposed to having a nice big house. Are you? Okay. But when that big house comes at the expense of the other causes of God, that's when we might have crossed the line. In Proverbs 23, verses 4 and 5, do not toil to acquire wealth. Be discerning enough to desist. When your eyes light on it, it is gone, for suddenly it sprouts wings, flying like an eagle toward heaven. They have this book out there, and it's about people who have won the lottery and what happens to them. And there's an episode in this book about Buddy Post. He won $16.2 million in the Pennsylvania lottery. $16.2 million. How many of you could live the rest of your life on $16.2? Yeah, I could, because my life's short. Some of you younger guys, you need a little more. So step it up. Okay? Now, since his windfall, these are the things that has befallen him. Okay? He's been convicted of assault. He's divorced from his 6th wife. Ouch. You know what the common denominator was to all of those marriages? Him. He was the common denominator of all those. Okay, had a different wife every time, but he was the common denominator. Okay, his brother was convicted of trying to kill him. Okay, his landlady successfully sued him for 1/3 of his winnings. Now, if you have 16.2, why do you have a landlord anyway? I don't know. That doesn't make sense to me, but she got 1/3 of his winnings. Now, in order to pay off of all of his stuff, he tried to auction off 17 future installments, because he was getting it on the monthly thing, or the yearly thing. And he tried to auction off 17 future installments of his winnings so that he could pay off his stuff. And his stuff included overdue taxes, legal fees, and a number of failed business ventures. Now, here's I'm going to read this passage again. When your eyes light on it, it is gone, for suddenly it sprouts wings, flying like an eagle toward heaven. When you put your eyes on the money, it sprouts wings and flies away. Buddy Post here, his stuff flew away. Having money doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be wealthy. It could mean that you're just dumb. And it could make you crazy. Now, in the 50s, if you've seen movies about that, or you've read in history books about the 50s, what was it, do you think, was kind of the root basis for our economic outlook, as individual families? Here it is. Keeping up with the Joneses. Keeping up with the Joneses, okay? You look at your neighbor, they get a new car. In the 50s, you say, I got to get a new car. If they get a little upgrade on their house, you got to get a little upgrade on your house. And so keeping up with the Joneses was kind of the economic mantra of the day. Today, that is not the case, right? Why is it not the case today? Most of us don't even know our neighbors, And it was funny. I saw my neighbor the other day, and she came in, and we do know her. Her name is Doreen. She's a lovely lady. But she came in. She drove up in her driveway. Her garage door automatically went up. She went in, and the garage door automatically went down. And I went, and she didn't see me. And that's kind of the way we are. Cindy and I are never that way, are we? We never drive in the garage and just close it and never see anybody because we can't get in the garage. But and it's my fault. I'll take this one. It's my fault. I have stuff, and I have to take care of it. But now, what is the economic mantra of today? We don't keep up with the Joneses, do we? Who do we keep up with? We keep up with reality TV. Oh, I know. Oh no, but that's true. Have you ever heard of the show Keeping Up with? Thank you. Keeping Up with the Kardashians. The Kardashians, they have a line of clothing that you can buy in order to keep up with them, and they'll set the trends, they'll set the style, they'll set the stuff, and and I know you're all shaking your head like this, but I want you to know that most of you that are shaking your heads, you remember the 50s and Keeping Up with the Joneses. I'm looking at the younger guys here, and they're all going. Mm-hmm. That's what we compare to. And so therefore, we're keeping up with these celebrities. We're keeping up with these people that make 10 times, 100 times more money than we do. And we have this idea. And what does it do? It causes us to be worse off financially. Learn to live modestly. Okay. A lot of people, I like this. I see a trend happening among older people, senior adults, people that are getting ready to retire. They're retiring and they're doing mission activity. Okay, they're doing church ministry stuff. They're going out and they have saved up some money and they're able to make a mission trip. They're able to do something of significance there. Okay, now that's a great option. I want you to keep that in mind. If we could all get to a position where we could retire with some money and be able to do some significant ministry, what a tremendous blessing that would be to us as well as to the cause of God. Okay, number 4. Okay, remember, balancing the bottom line means trusting God and giving generously. Trusting God and giving generously. A man had a debilitating illness and he was getting ready to die, and he called his wife in and he says, "Honey, I want you to promise me one thing. I want you to promise me one thing." And what can she do? She can't say no. The man's dying. And so she says, "Okay, honey, I'll promise. What is it you want me to do?" He says, "When I die, what I want you to do is get all my money and put it in the casket with me. I want it to go with me." And so she says, oh, man. And she knows you can't take your money with you, but she can't argue with the guy. He's dying. So she says, okay, I'll do that. And so several weeks later, he died, and she arranges the funeral. They're sitting at the funeral, and the funeral director is getting ready to close the casket. It was an open casket thing, and they're getting ready to close. She said, wait. And she goes up there with this big bag and puts it in there. Puts it in, and she goes and sits down. Now, she's sitting with her best friend, and her best friend knows the promise that she's made. And her best friend just very quietly says, you didn't really do that, did you? She goes, oh, yeah, I promised him. I'm a Christian woman. I've got to do what I promised. She says, you really put all that money in there? She goes, oh, yeah. She says, well, don't you feel bad about that? She goes, no, not at all. I don't feel bad at all. Because I went and got his money, put it in my bank account, and I wrote him a check. Now, I'm going to say, you can't really take it with you. You can't take it with you. So if somebody wants to, write them a check. And make sure it gets sealed. Make sure nobody can get that out of there. But the truth is, Proverbs chapter 3, verses 9 and 10, honor the Lord with all your wealth, and with the first fruits of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will be bursting with wine. How many of you are agriculturalists? Okay? That make your living from selling produce. Okay, good. Now, what the writer here is talking about is speaking really to an agrarian society, okay, in which everybody, they planted crops. And what they said was, and what God asked of them was to honor me first. When your crops start to produce, I want you to take the first gathering of all that fruit and all that produce and all that stuff, and I want you to bring it and offer it to me. And when you do that, it will be a sign. And what will the sign be? The sign will be that you're dependent on me, that you recognize me as your God, the provider. And so therefore, when you bring that first offering to me, it helps us be in the right perspective, helps us be on the right playing field. So first fruits, agrarian society, first of their crops. Now, for us, what's the application for us? If we truly want God to know that we are dependent on Him, then He gets the first of our offerings. Okay, the first of our, whether it be cash, whether it be time, whether it be effort, whether it be energy, He gets the best of that, because now we're letting Him know, I am dependent on you for all of the rest. You get the first and the best, and then I will live on all of the rest. Proverbs 11, 24 and 25 says this, one gives freely, yet grows all the richer. Another withholds what he should give and only suffers want. Whoever brings blessings will be enriched, and the one who waters will himself be watered. Now, I want you to hear me clearly when I say this. Our church is not about getting your money. Never has been, never will be. Our church is about God getting your heart. When God first has your heart, He will have everything else that you have. Okay? Because it gets in the proper perspective. And that's what the writer here is really telling us here in Proverbs, is that when God gets your heart, you will give Him your first and your best. You'll give Him the first and the best. And then God will supply for you everything else that you need. God will give you what you need to give to other people. And when we stop and think about it, this entire world and everything else in it is God's. It's God's. It's His creation. So therefore, whatever I give to other people, whatever I give to the church, whatever I give to anything, is really His first. And it's not hard to give away other people's money, is it? Have you ever had somebody give away your money? And I'll just give this as an illustration to you. Cindy and I, every year at Christmas, people will give us money. People will give us some money. I shouldn't say give us money, but many times there's somebody who I really don't know how to say this clearly, do I? Somebody who loves us will give us some money, let's say. It's never happened, but let's say it did happen. No, it does happen. And what we do with that is that we try to use that because it's, we didn't work for that money. We weren't counting on that money. It was just somebody loved us and gave us some money. And so what we do is we take that money and we'll give it to somebody else. It makes us look, when we give it to somebody else, they go, oh, wow, that's really cool. Man, that was really a tremendous gift. No, it wasn't. It wasn't ours. And that's the way it is with God. When he gives us stuff and we give his stuff away, it's not really that we did a tremendous thing, but it's that we relied on God so that we could be a conduit through which he can work and get the money to where it needs to be.